Hi folks, Lou here, and I'm going to talk about the micro effects of weather. And then in a later video, I'll talk about the macro effects, which is to say climate, and how that's depicted in games. Now, weather is very much a random factor in warfare. Consider Napoleon at Waterloo. It rained during the night, and so he couldn't attack until the late morning, 3 to 4 more hours after he would have attacked in normal circumstances. And you've probably heard that Wellington said it was a near-run thing. If the French had had 3 or 4 more hours to attack, they certainly would have driven Wellington's forces from the field, and then the arrival of the Prussians would have just got the Prussians, perhaps, destroyed as well. So the weather, in effect, you could almost say the weather determined who won. Now consider something in the same area, but more than a century later, the Battle of the Bulge, and specifically the Battle of Bastogne. In the Battle of Bastogne, just as the 101st Airborne was arriving, fragments of units, American units, stopped the initial thrust of the German panzers toward Bastogne. At that point, as the 101st set up, the Germans decided to have their 2 panzer divisions in that group move on, going across the mud and so on, taking secondary roads, because Bastogne was very much a road junction, a very important road junction. They left 1 Panzer Grenadier regiment behind. Well, at that point, the Allies outnumbered the Germans, and they had more armored vehicles. They had a huge artillery park. Only lack of supply could defeat them. That supply had to be airdropped. The only thing that was going to stop the airdrop was the weather. Well, in the event, one day the weather was too bad, but there were deliveries on other days. And nonetheless, the Allies were down to 20 shells per gun at one point. And if you've been following the Ukraine war, you know that's not much at all. Artillery needs to shoot a lot of shells, especially World War II. They didn't have the precision they do today. Now, if we look at battles more generally, especially older ones, weather could prevent a battle from occurring. If it was raining, if it was too cold, perhaps even. And certainly the rain could make a big difference, and so would fog. You can think of the rain getting bowstrings wet or wetting gunpowder, as well as obscuring everything. Think of battles at sea, how weather can cloak a force from aerial or other scouts. The weather is very important in individual battles. Now, because the weather is a random factor, most gamers, and certainly the planner type gamers, don't like weather interfering with what they're doing. In some war games, you roll for weather, but in most you don't. You could take that situation in the Battle of Bastogne and turn it into a roll for supply, but that's not fun, however realistic it might be, because gamers want to control things and want to feel that they are the ones who determine their fate and not some bloody die rolls for weather. Now, I tend to design war games that are grand strategic, where weather has a minimal effect, such as diplomacy and Britannia. Of course, I didn't design diplomacy. But on a tactical scale, weather is very important. Now, when I talk about the other aspect of this, climate, and climate changes over centuries sometimes, then even at grand strategic scale, it's important. And there's nothing that you can do about it because it's going to happen. And so you don't need to worry about rolling a die for the climate. The climate is going to change or not change according to what actually happened in history. Thanks for listening.